in today. For those who weren't in the room, the language today from the speakers will be English. Also, it's expected to rain today. So if you're looking for lunch, the lunch will be moved in from the poolside into the Movenpick, and there's also lunch at the Mogador. So don't go poolside looking for that. Another reminder that on Saturday, Morocco is playing Portugal. So you guys got, yeah. I think you guys got a taste of what could happen to the streets. So if any of you are leaving Saturday, early evening, you should be prepared to get to the airport probably before the end of the game. Either way, well, there's only one way, right? They're gonna win, so. And then just lastly, I wanted to take a quick survey of the room. I'm gonna ask you to raise your hand and keep your hand up. So who here is at the summit for the first time? Wow. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Who here has had an aha moment? Keep your hands up. Who has met or saw something inspiring? All right, so all of you guys with your hands up, we have an insights and outputs room where we are collecting those insights. If you could stop by, we are using those for our session tomorrow. Stop by and share some of those aha moments, some of those inspiring pieces of information that you've seen. The rooms can be found at the Francophone Cafe, which is on the second floor, and read a room on the bottom floor. So please stop by, share those insights. If you hear something really inspiring today, make sure you get that on a post-it. We have a group collecting, clustering, et cetera, et cetera. So that is all for me. I'm going to hand it over to the panel.
I always feel like I'm in a Matt Damon movie when that thing goes up. That wasn't the order we're supposed to sit in, but I'm just teasing. Hi, good morning. I'm very excited to be hosting this session. Thank you for all being here. The lights are epic and blinding. The last time I did this was 32 years ago when I was hosting a rave party on the beach of Goa. This is going to be a little more different and a lot more educational, I hope. I'm going to briefly, I can do this here. So my mother taught me English. So all my flaws are mine. All that I learned is hers. But as we were prepping for this AI session, one of the things that I wanted to share was simple uses of AI. And I'm going to have to play a video that talks about this product called Grammarly. It's not endorsed by me in any shape or form, but it's a product that uses AI to write better English. So perhaps we can play the video to kick things off.
Grammarly can help you write quickly and confidently, so you never have to slow down at work. Stay on top of emails, documents, and more without having to stay put. Whether you're working on your computer or on your phone, Grammarly provides instant writing advice, so your messages are clear without sounding rushed. Instant corrections make your writing mistake-free, while keeping it short, sweet, and fitting in tone. Join more than 20 million people who use Grammarly's writing assistant every day. Download Grammarly today for better, smarter, faster writing at work.
Excellent. So for folks who haven't used Grammarly, I highly encourage you to try it out. It's a soft way of understanding how AI works in terms of training, testing, and reinforcement. AI can, let me just have the Slido instead, please. We're going to make you do a quick poll to kick things off. There'll be a QR code that pops up on the screen in moments, and there'll be two sets of questions. And in those questions, we can, or we can come back to it. All right. And those questions are going to just do a quick pulse check on how familiar you are with some elements of AI as it relates to SBC. and what your opinions are on how to use AI, if you've used AI, where you've used AI to run SBC campaigns. How about we come back to it at the end then, folks? I think we have a slight technical glitch. So with AI, I'm going to set context and I'm going to defer to my esteemed colleagues here. But I'm going to talk about three things in AI. One is that if you've been on the internet in the recent week to 2 weeks, you've been seeing a lot of madness about AI GPT-3 chatbot. So if you've been on Twitter, or if you're like Jamie and don't use Twitter, but use the internet, Google this, Google Chat GPT, and take it for a spin. It's free to use. It'll give you a sense of how language models work. And if you're feeling particularly adventurous after that, and if there are some hidden artists in this room, then check out DALL-E. DALL-E is also a beautiful generative image product that will build interesting art pieces for you. Also fun to use for those of you with kids like me. It's a great way to spend an hour, 2 hours when you don't want them to be watching random television content. But along with those two amazing benefits of AI, some of you will be familiar with Cambridge Analytica back in the day, about 5 years ago. So AI can also polarize. And that is what our conversation today is about, is AI and misinformation, and how we as SBC practitioners need to think about when to use AI, how to use AI, and to learn from that. So we'll talk about the AI, the good, the bad, the ugly. A little Clint Eastwood is inspired here. And let me introduce you to three eminent people who do not dabble in misinformation. So on the far end is Jamie Arkin. Jamie is the Director of Partnerships at AIfluence. She's a master's in public health from Tulane, New Orleans, one of my favorite cities. And she spent the last 7 years in East Africa working on technology for the dev sector. One interesting factor, I asked her what brought her here, and she talked about the idea of being in civic service, of being in parts of the world where it made sense for her to engage her technology and her skills. So it's been a nice ride for her to have been here and driven impact. Next is Chris Mahony. It is spelled Mahony without the E. It took me forever to figure that out. But Chris is the founder and CEO of Peloria Insights. Definitely check them out online. Chris is a lawyer and an economist, and was a rugby player back in the day, but still looks good. Finally, bringing up the panel is Dr. Mehdi Snene. And Mehdi and I spent the last couple of days arguing about mental health, brain health, well-being, how I conflate those topics. So he'll definitely educate us a bunch on what misinformation is and is not in the health space. So to kick things off, Jamie, let's give you the tough question off the bat. All of us worry about data privacy, limitations, legislation, laws, what's good, what's not good, terms of consent. As a practitioner in this space, can you just educate us all about the limitations, if any, the challenges, and what would the watch-outs be for all of us as we use digital means to drive SBC?
So the work that AIfluence does is very specific and very SBC based. We use AI to help us identify people that we can turn into influencers. And with that being said, we're working with people who have between 1,000 and 50,000 followers on social media. So the thing that AI really helps us with is what I call it's kind of finding the needle in the haystack, looking for regular people. It's easy for us to come forward and say, oh yeah, we know that this is, the most famous person on this platform. This person has millions of followers. That's doable, but the AI has to help us kind of get to the right people. But that being said, those right people also have privacy rights and needs. And so I don't know about you guys, but my Facebook and my Instagram are set on private. So my own platform will never identify me. Thank you, Cambridge Analytica, for teaching us that these things should exist. A lot of my partners also want to work with people 16 to 24, the youth. They're very important to reach. Well, I'm not working with anybody 16 and 17 years old, actually anybody under 18, because they're minors. So our influencers will never be minors. And also our data sets. We can see how many people were reached, how many people commented, how many people, liked a post. But when it comes to data about people under 18, it's almost like a black box. All of a sudden, there's kind of a missing space. So those things are really important to note and definitely come up against some of the needs that our donors and our funders want, because they're saying, well, you have to reach these people. These are the boxes we're trying to tick. And I have to say, like, we know that they see social media. We know that they're on it, but I can't give you that data necessarily about their engagements. And even a layer below that is who is commenting on the content. And I want to make sure that people who are engaging with that content don't feel watched, right? And so we try to also keep all of their names private. And so it is this mix of both respect and ethics. There's some AI, and then there's just some, like, what do you do as a good person who's doing programming in SBC to reach the right people, but also to not overstep, because AIfluence came to exist in a post-Cambridge Analytica world. We were founded in December 2019. And so if we don't play by the rules from the start and do our best to constantly question our ethics and our ability to do better by people, well, we're going to be also the next scandal. And that's the last thing a startup wants.
Speaking of scandals, what do you do when an influencer goes rogue? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, so I will say it's not happened to us yet. And I think that's for a couple reasons. Well, how do we prevent influencers from going rogue? Stipends, right? We pay influencers stipends to work with us. It's important we pay them stipends because we ask them to do a lot of work to create organic content. It's nice to have an influencer who's going to repost your traditional poster on their social media account. But then why is it social media? That's just media in another place. So we ask them to create their own content. They have to make their own video and photo and text and share their opinions. And they have to get it approved by AIfluence before it goes live. And we review every post, not with AI, but with humans for now, maybe AI in the future, but we're still a startup, haven't built that far yet. But actually using AI to scan all of the posts before they go live. And then once they do go live, we double check it to make sure that nothing changed in between the thumbs up and the post. Because there's stipends attached to doing all of this hard work, if they're not following our protocols, they're going to lose their stipend, right? We're going to end our contract, and we contract everybody. We want them to feel like professionals. We treat them like professionals. So that helps us avoid that first bit. The second thing that's important to note, as I mentioned, is we only work with micro and nano influencers. If someone has 3,000 followers and goes rogue, it has very little ripple effect compared to when Kanye just had to lose contracts with some of the biggest companies in the world because he's gone full rogue. You know, it's so different to see a community healthcare worker post something that's a bit off brand than it is to see a huge celebrity. And I think just by our model in itself, not working with celebrities who 100% of the time will go rogue in some way, in some fashion, we've protected ourselves from that as well.
Thanks, Jamie. There are three interesting resources that I just want to bring attention to. One is definitely check out all the conversation on Twitter for Twitter content moderation since Mr. Musk's bought it over. Check out a recent thing that the Facebook Advisory Board put out. And finally, for those of you not familiar with Kanye's misdeeds, do check that out. But let me go to Chris. Chris, you work a lot on predicting violence, predicting misinformation, thinking through government policy changes. As you build technology, what do you keep front and center?
Well, our work came out of a joint UN World Bank process called Pathways for Peace, which was an effort to synthesize at least what we think we know about what drives change and levels of different forms of violence around the world. And the big learning from that was that in these large multilateral institutions, there's enormous disciplinary bias, right? So yeah, take for example, the bank, these are pretty much full of economists, or there's at least a disproportionate number of them. And so they tend to measure change in objective, real phenomena and change in outcomes. Right. And of course, when we're trying to understand what drives human behavior, you know, we need to be able to account for change in the natural world, change in the built world and change in the social world and change in human perceptions of all those things, right? And so the perception side was the big missing gap that, you know, for their own internal reasons, these multilateral organizations are very apprehensive about engaging with, right? So that was really the impetus to, you know, depart and begin to develop models that ingest data representing both real phenomena and online language metadata perceptions of those things, so that we can actually account for the dynamic change in these sort of impossible to understand dynamic interactions between change in reality, change in perceptions of that reality that actually drive social group specific or not inclination to engage in violence, to migrate, to change policy, and that's really what we try to keep front and center is the role that historians, political scientists, economists, sociologists, anthropologists, development economists can all play by contesting the assumptions that underpin how they understand things, so that we optimize what phenomena we ingest, what data best represents that phenomena, how we curate that data before we even get to the design of the data science experiments themselves.
I feel like I have so many questions to ask, and he came in late, so he wasn't here for the last 2 days of me interrogating Jamie and Mehdi. But as a follow-up question, a question that I've been asked a lot in the last few days is around bias and about lived experiences. I'd love to get your perspective to share with the crowd on how lived experiences inform better AI models.
Right. So, I mean, for us, it's not just about having that multidisciplinarity inform the design of the modeling, right? It's about, okay, once we've achieved a level of accuracy in forecasting social phenomena, there's also the sort of what we call the ablation and other econometric methods that we employ to identify what are the configuration of real and perceived phenomena most associated with enhanced accuracy, right? So then we can go to development actors, and this is where the social and behavioral change rubber meets the road, so to speak, and say, here's the configuration or the percentage contribution of all these different phenomena, real and perceived, associated with change. Therefore, here, in order to sustainably drive down levels of violence or the spread of misinformation across this platform under these circumstances at this time of day, whatever it is, you know, here's what you should be doing, at what scale and what locations, over what timeline, with what collaborators, and here's the phraseology and language configuration you should be using to communicate about it across what platforms. Now, there's also a further explanatory dimension, which is, okay, we might have this configuration of things, but what do they really represent, right? And so it's one thing to have that multidisciplinarity. It's a whole nother thing to say, have that lived experience, right? Developing a model for Eastern DRC, for example, and we find that standing pools of water in urban areas are highly associated with dramatically elevated levels of violence. And, you know, the climate scientists were the ones saying, please, you know, make sure you're accounting for this alongside the, you know, 5 square meter or 3 square meter geographic resolution depicting crop type, crop yield, those sorts of things. And so they want to see if the water is associated with change in that, which then affects commodity prices, is the hypothesis, which and commodity prices affect grievance, you know, which can render people more vulnerable to mobilization of violence. They're not thinking, well, these standing pools of water in urban areas might be proxies for poverty, because that's where the mosquitoes are. So only the poorest people live near these areas. Someone that lives in Goma, right, and having them as part of the team, they're able to say, actually, this is what you're really looking at here. You know, those are the people that are least able to provide some bribe or give some chattel to armed groups when they come into town. And so therefore, they're disproportionately subject to violence, right? Even, the anthropologist that specializes in that area might not pick up on that, on that topic. So there's kind of one anecdotal example of so many that we come across all the time. And if we don't have that diversity of lived experience, then we tend to miss things. And when you miss things, your accuracy is lower. Your capacity to explain in a credible way is diminished. And so for us, it's not just that it's the right thing to do to manage and mitigate bias, both disciplinary and across different lived experiences, but for us, it's a performance thing as well.
Thank you, Chris. Your turn now. We've heard these two semi-capitalistic people talk a bit. I'm teasing there. But you've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work on dementia, Alzheimer's, mental health. I'd love to get your perspective on AI, behavior change, and health.
Sure. So it's, I join my colleagues. Yeah, I'll join my colleagues in their perception. I'll start with capitalist vision. It's in neuroscience and AI, most of the research is being driven by marketing and commercial perspective. So it started in neuromarketing, and then we moved to neurofinance. And we have been studying the behavior of consumers from a neuroscientific perspective in order to change their behavior and push them to consume more or to act or react to different stimuli that we can put in the commercial environment. So that's one of the strengths of neuroscience discipline when it comes to the AI. But it's I'd like to just pick something before jumping into the mental health space and neuroscience and the merge of all these disciplines together between AI, neuroscience, behavioral change, brain health, mental health. All these aspects are coming together in a very powerful form. AI is much more something that is based on the input than the output. More data we feed in the AI models, more we learn about the behavior, and more we have a better and precise and effective approach to the modeling perspective. So the output will be strongly correlated with the quality of the input, data input. So as long as we feed in the models with accurate data, good quality data or information, the model will react accordingly and will have a good prediction or modeling of the behavior of the community or of the individuals. And as soon as we start bringing less or toxic data, less performing data, lower quality data, our models will react accordingly. And then it's not one single shot. AI is really a continuous work. And then at any moment, we can start feeding in with some toxic data or some bad quality data. And then that will impact the life of the model. This is not something very static that we are used to see in the classical computing. This is something evolving over the time. So we really need to be very careful when we talk about misinformation, because it's not just one shot. It can happen at any time during the life cycle of the AI models. So that's something from a computing perspective. But when it comes to the mental health or the brain health, to be more precise, let me pick the example of use of AI there. It's if you talk about schizophrenia, for example, this is a brain health issue, very common disorder that need to go through chemical treatments. And there is no way that there is an AI model that could help you to get rid of schizophrenia symptoms or schizophrenia conditions. And where we use AI is much more about understanding the adherence, patient adherence to the treatments, which is well known in the schizophrenia is that we have an average time where the patient will give up with the treatment, and then that's the relapse of the patients. It happens often. That's require a lot of investment. That's a big loss, and then it can lead to some violence. It can be very harmful for the patient. It can be one of the origin of suicide among schizophrenia patients, but also it can lead to severe drug abuse. It can be lead a lot of other issues. So this What we used to do is a statistical approach at the early beginning in the schizophrenia treatment to understand among the social determinant of health of the patient, how to cluster the patients and how to measure his adherence and what is the expected average time where the patient will give up with the treatment, prescribed treatment. And that works well with the community and global aspects and global vision. But when it comes to a single one, a single individual, we need to make it a little bit more personalized approach. And that's the AI's power there. It can give us a much more clear vision of patient preference. It can stick to the patient adherence perception, and then it can be much more precise in the term of when the patient will give up with the prescribed treatment, and then we can act accordingly. So the preventive or predictive aspects of the AI in mental health, especially with people who are suffering from mental disorder, that impact their capability or capacity of expressing or talking about their mental issue, because they are already facing some of these conditions that prevent them from bringing their preferences. So AI is playing a major role in these new perception of patient adherence and patient activation, which is a kind of behavioral change among patient community, and then playing a big role, especially when it comes to the reducing of stigma impact by understanding and bringing some preferences of the patient. You can't simply prescribe or recommend to the patient the same treatment than to the others if his preferences is quite different than others. There is no solutions that fits all. And by statistical perspective, that's what we used to do. You only have a community-based orientation. So the AI is bringing these more individual approaches there, which is very helpful to reduce at least the relapse among patients when it comes to the mental conditions.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. Follow-up would be that there's a ton of misinformation / fake news in the public health space. And Chris and Jamie, I want you to chime in here too. As civilians or as practitioners, how do we deal with this? Or is it a big problem, or does the media make it to be a bigger problem?
Yeah, it's very controversial, and let's be very frank. As a researcher, we have to stand up against these misinformation definition that we have today. Misinformation is coming from both sides. So that's something that we need to admit and to put on the table, to be asked and to be investigated. It's not a single side that is bringing this misinformation. It becomes a very trendy keywords with the COVID-19 vaccination campaign. That's very clear, but also with these mass media possibility of any citizen that could spread any kind of information. But it doesn't mean that only citizens who are making misinformation, and we need to be very careful when it comes to the classification of mis and disinformation, and also hidden information. These are three aspects that need to be on the table, because it's not one way, it's double way. Misinformation is a perception based on the intention. It's not something that is static in the time. It can evolve, and then we have to deal with it as a researcher as it is. And then we have to be very neutral in that space and be able to break the chains today that we have in that space, to put a clear labeling and identification of what is happening in the misinformation space. Beyond that, when it comes to the public health, there is a big issue regarding the misinformation and the vaccine, for example, and we have seen, but at some point, we have built a double layers or triple layers of misinformation. So it's becoming something very strange. We can't make a clear distinction about exactly what is happening into that space. And that could induce in a community-based decision-making that could not be based on evidence, that could not be based on science results, and that could be based on intuition or intention or misinterpretation. And that space is being now fully crowded with different actors trying to defend their own vision by labeling others as misinformation leaders, misinformation things. So we need, as a researcher, to stand in the middle and to understand exactly what is going on, but because it's very crowded, it's very fuzzy, and it's very, it can lead to a very bad and harmful situations. We have seen it with the AI. During the COVID-19 crisis, a lot of harmful AI have been produced. A lot of junky AI have been produced. That is useless. There was a lot of investment into the AI approaches to early detection of COVID-19 from CAF, early detection of the COVID from crowd simulation. Most of these AI models are not working, honestly, and then I have to admit that we failed there. And for example, the contact tracing application and AI on the mobility data, we are no longer talking about it.
Yes.
That's disappeared from the spectrum because it was not something that fit within the citizen perspective. It's not a citizen-centric approach. And then as long as we consider that we are giving lessons, either in misinformation, AI building, all these kind of scientific approach, we'll be missing our targets. And then we will keep the measure work, the measure advancement in AI, in data, in the misinformation treatment to big companies. And I think it's the wrong way. And we should react quickly before it's being too late.
Thank you. Chris, as you build, as you build models, how do you manage for misinformation, disinformation, and hidden information? How do you test? How are you confident about accuracies? Not to hold you to a higher bar than anybody else, but I think these are questions that this audience would benefit massively from.
I mean, we're perhaps similar to some of the comments from Mehdi. We're pretty apprehensive about really ever using the word disinformation because it goes to the intent of the person deploying the content. So we kind of go inside people's heads and identify their intent. You can identify some phenomena around the posting of content, coordinated commentary or sharing that might be red flags for further exploration for others to identify whether the content is disinformation. But in terms of measuring, that's the difficulty, right? So say, for example, something in the health sciences, it might be more clear cut as to what constitutes misinformation or not, because there's a scientific basis for saying this is reality, this is not, right? In terms of, say, the risk associated with some treatment. Whereas if you're talking about sort of socio-political phenomena, then it's much more subjective, right? And so what one can do is say, for example, work with a client or a partner and say, okay, we're going to accept a certain baseline, right? Where we measure against a baseline, say, for example, of how maybe Reuters and Associated Press are reporting either a fact pattern or a particular phenomena. And then we can say, so from that point, we can then automate the designation of language text content as either true, not true, partially true, or opinion represented as fact, right? And from there, one can then, once you have that automated capacity, you can then monitor language about that topic and subtopics, and you can see those four categories increase and decrease at scale, one, on the monitoring side, and then two, you can develop models to forecast change in it and identify what configuration of content dimensions and background sort of economic phenomena, climate phenomena is most associated with change in the production and spread of content falling into those different categories, right? So then that enables you to say, okay, like here's the historical change, here's the future forecast risk, and here is the content that you can deploy, and you can develop bots that automate the creation of language phraseology that actually produces the accepted content, say that AP and Reuters might be producing, and that is most associated with the decline in the spread of that most harmful category, the not true. category of information. So that's kind of our approach to it. And of course, some people say, oh, well, we would also like to accept, you know, Der Spiegel or the Times or New York Times's fact pattern. And of course, that then, you know, that's a subjective disposition as well, right? Because what does that require? It requires that you make assertions about the credibility and the historical performance of the reporting of these entities, right? So this is still an inexact science. And I think the most important thing is for humility to kind of be at the forefront, you know, and transparency about how people are going about this so that the credibility can be built up over time, because that's the important thing, because that credibility, that trust, very easy to destroy, difficult to build up. So you've got to be really diligent on that, in my view.
Thank you for that. Jamie, bring this up as you know, you mentioned content moderation at the beginning, and you're working this army of influence is only going to get bigger. Content moderation is going to become a bigger and bigger challenge. Large entities like Facebook have thousands of people doing this in addition to AI models. How are you thinking about classifying disinformation?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, from our side, I don't think it's going to be our strength to be doing the social listening alone. There's a lot of organizations out there that have been building those models for years, looking at those factors. But I think for me, the thing is there's mis and disinformation, and then there's lack of information, right?
Yeah.
And I'm finding that there are massive gaps in just being able to say, okay, we know that, you know, family planning of XYZ sort doesn't cause infertility in the long run. Great. Do you have a website with a MOH logo that's in the local language that's really easy to understand? You know, 3 lines about the likelihood and the number of reported cases of infertility online, so that someone who's going on Instagram can easily both validate the information so that we can, you know, embed some ideas of educating people about how to validate content. You know, is that information online? And honestly, most of the time it's not. You know, we're having another conversation right now about COVID, and I think Busara Center had done some research about how to communicate to people the likelihood of experiencing a severe side effect from the vaccine. And they found if you showed them the statistic, like it's 0.000x% that you're going to develop myocarditis, people are more likely to trust that information if they can see the facts. Well, often those facts aren't available to people. So, you know, we're having another discussion in Namibia with a partner saying, okay, how many cases of myocarditis has the government seen, so that we can put it into layman's terms and make sure it's available to the public, so that they're not running with data that says myocarditis is everywhere for everybody who's had a COVID vaccine, and it's crazy, and the numbers are XYZ all over the world, and it's the same as everybody in Namibia. Maybe it's not. And so I think there's misinformation and disinformation, and then the information gap. And I really want to work with our partners to say, how can we fill the information gap? Because that is the space that you can derail, hopefully, some of the mis and dis. And I think we talked about that OECD study that was that just came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago, that said like 90% of people don't want to share misinformation. They're doing it because they didn't know that it was misinformation. And then alongside that, how can we teach people about fact checking in a way that is 3 seconds? You know, this is the 3 things you can do. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go on, but I want to share one other example. I think that affects a lot of people in this room, aligned with teaching people about how to identify mis and disinformation by just simply fact checking. Maybe 2 months ago or a little bit less, there was something that showed up on my Instagram story over and over and over again. And it was 15,000 people in Iran are being put to death because they protested for women's rights. And the mainstream media is not talking about it. The mainstream media is not talking about it because that wasn't a fact. 15,000 people, I think, had been arrested, and they were protesting this women's rights. And the law had said that those people could be put to death. And so you're taking 3 things and putting them together, and they were saying that all these people are being sentenced to death. And absolutely, it's a potential in the future. But the reason the mainstream media wasn't talking about it is because it wasn't validated. And then about a day or two later, all of a sudden I see on my news, oh, this major celebrity account has been deactivated. This one has been in trouble. This one is now this thing is marked as disinformation. And all these people sharing it were very smart people with master's degrees. And some of you in this room probably shared it as well. And I respect that because all of us don't want people to be put to death for protesting for women's rights. We all probably believe in women's rights. But just because we weren't saying that that 5G was causing COVID, and we were talking about something we agree with in this space, meant that we weren't as likely to actually check and think, is this misinformation? And I think we're all subject to it.
So wait, 5G doesn't cause COVID?
You know what? Actually, I haven't checked that. I haven't validated it. I made it up myself that it didn't do it. But
That's such a great segue into this idea of walking through the poster alley back there. It was so cool to watch how many, read about and learn about how many campaigns have been done using social media. So some of us in the room are old enough to know a world before social media and before the internet, and when internet came, dial up, etc. And there were fears that the internet would take away jobs, and there were fears that e-commerce would take away jobs, and it has, but it's also built and created many, many jobs. So my questions, moving from sort of misinformation to AI pluses and minuses. Let's start with the plus, and maybe Dr. Mehdi, you can kick us off. What, as you think about jobs being one big driver of economies and benefits, and then scale and capital, will AI create jobs of the same scale that the internet has and social media has? There's so much in that.
Yeah, it depends on which side of the AI will be sitting. So it's there's this kind of outcome from the AI, which are models, understanding, predictive capacity, better understanding of community, better understanding of personalized behavior. All these models that are being generated today, and I have to admit that they are not sharing, they are not in the public good space. And most of it is led by private companies, like these will not.
Guilty.
And then although we are advocating for a very big strategy for data sharing, we rarely hear about outcome sharing when it comes to the AI. So the wealth is not sharing, models are not being shared. We don't know exactly what the things are, what are being done with our data. So there is a black box there sitting in the middle about what is the AI perspective, what is the AI outcome. Most of us are using some of these social media networks, and then we can see how they are advanced in terms of targeting advertisement to our personalized profile. And then that's a kind of outcome, that's a kind of wealth. I'm providing my own data, you are sending advertisements to other companies, but I'm not inside of the process at all. I'm not informed about the process. So that's a kind a very mystery wealth generation behind the AI. What is the real perspective of making AI as a digital public good or universal public good with all these models being generated, especially when it comes to the behavior, consumer, patients, all these things? Unless we have a common agreement on the data sharing should come with the outcome sharing, that the data, the people who are bringing their data in that space deserve and have the right to know about how their data is being used and how these AI models are generating wealth, are generating new insights and knowledge, and that these kind of models are centric to the patients or to the people who are bringing their data. I seriously doubt that there will be any kind of common well-being and wealth distributed across the population generated by the AI. I'm very skeptical when it comes to the AI outcome across the global humanity. And it seems for the moment that there is a lot of private companies that reach the quantum supremacy. Let's talk about Google, who just realized the first protein folding operation done on the AI, which is one of the biggest avenue to the drug discovery. And then we don't know anything about the results. We don't know anything about the intention behind that. So the AI is for the moment clearly among 4 or 5 big private companies, the AI supremacy. And then if things keep going as they are, we will see the change in the term of the perceptions of these companies. And then we know that digital, when we've moved from analog to digital, we have shifted the power between public and private. So, and then we have enabled the wealth creation among private companies. But now with this quantum and AI shift, we may also bring the more power into the hands of these private companies. And then I have very strong doubts about they willing to share this power and wealth among the population.
I love that. Building on that, there's a conversation a couple of us had earlier today about converting part of this into a utility. So Chris, do you think Twitter should be a utility? Or do you think all AI data and outcomes should be public good utilities, and then you can commercialize them or not, but there's no black box? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to a great extent, it comes down to ownership and the accountability of that ownership, right? And so, you know, a lot of these issues are kind of symptoms of perverse incentives, like internal structural incentives that are built, that are foundational, right? And therein lies, I think, the biggest problem for us. We're a public benefit corporation, right? So what that means is we are accountable not just to commercial performance, but also to a public interest mandate, right? So if someone's investing into us, they can't then hold us accountable only to commercial performance, right? So you have companies like Twitter, Facebook, that start out with these grandiose, aspirational sort of slogans, you know, about what they're doing and how they're going to change things. But in the end, what are they accountable to, right? Quarterly commercial performance. And those forces become ever more powerful, you know, the more they grow. And what that means is that it becomes ever more difficult for them to manage and mitigate the risks associated with what they're incentivized to do, grow revenue, grow profitability. And so, I mean, ideally, yes, Twitter would be a public utility, a public space, in my humble opinion. You know, because
I'm going to stop.
It is a public, I mean, it goes to the media, right? It's like, should you have public broadcasting?
Right.
You know? In my view, yes. And there should be, you know, there should be certain rules around presenting both sides and presenting an evidence-based approach, as opposed to, say, like, I think 20, 30 years ago, change in, say, for example, US domestic law, which, which rolled those demands back. Right. And then you had, you know, the propagation of private sector media news entities that maybe do more harm than good.
I love that. So with your permission, I'm going to go off script for a second. Can I have a quick show of hands of people raise their hands if they believe Twitter should be a publicly regulated utility? Nationalized or globalized?
There's a problem in that, right?
Yes, I agree.
Nationalized which nation? Right? You know, just because it's domiciled in the US, you know, then it should be the US government. You know, I mean, it's a transnational in nature, right? So then, like, it's even more difficult, you know, to obtain multilateral consensus, as we know from negotiating arms treaties, negotiating international courts, these sorts of things. So that's hard work. But is it worth governments coming together, rolling up their sleeves and doing that hard work? I think the answer is yes.
So I didn't catch those hands again. Can I get a quick? Lights are totally in my face, but feels roughly about 32.7%. If Jamie, bringing this back to sort of AI and utility, we had this conversation about Kanye. Again, quick show of hands. I want to make sure everybody knows Kanye or has heard of him. Yes, yes. Okay, that feels like 64.3%. So Kanye got booted off Twitter, and before Mr. Musk bought it, some other folks like the ex-US president were exited or banned from Twitter. in the world that Mehdi and Chris are advocating about, actually, are you advocating public utility also? Or are you just advocating open data sharing?
Open outcome
Open outcome sharing. Open outcome
yeah,
sharing.
outcome.
But not public utility. You're okay with it being commercially?
Yeah.
So in that world, in this complicated open outcome / public utility world, what responsibilities do the big AI tech company, the big five, right, have that would be beneficial to us all, commercially and in the development sector?
Yeah, I mean, in my perspective, it's a bit of checks and balances, right? So Twitter has felt like it's almost gone rogue in the last couple of months, and simultaneously, while it's kind of gone right, its advertisers, many of which have gone left, and so and left the platform. And so, whilst these platforms become accountable, we wish they were accountable to the people in this room. They're accountable to the money, right? They're accountable to who's paying the bills, and the advertisers are the main brands, and then those main brands are still public entities who have a PR problem. And so they're reacting in a different way. And so they're reacting in a way that is convenient to, I think, a lot of our beliefs, which is that bad people shouldn't say bad things freely and that they should be punished for it. Twitter has said bad people can do what they want, except for Kanye West and Alex Jones, but everybody else, welcome back. And we're no longer going to brand anything as mis or disinformation. We're not going to check any of it anymore. We're going to have a team of 1,700 people instead of 7,000. We're going to basically bare bones this, but the rest of the world still doesn't want to necessarily be associated with that. And I think that's where I would love to see government take a stronger stance. Which government? I don't know. I would think the US government, because they have quite a long history with technology. The Nigerian government banned Twitter last year for many months. We were running a campaign and we said to our client, we're just going to have people post on Twitter and we'll see what happens. We'll see if anybody sees the content. If they do, great. If they don't, no worries. We're posting on Facebook and Instagram also. Then Twitter got re-allowed into Nigeria midway through the campaign, just by coincidence. We didn't see any more reach on Twitter. Everyone had a VPN. It's 2021, 2022. Every single person had a VPN and they were still using the platform that was banned in their country. Maybe a couple of people didn't care to do it, but that says to me also that, yeah, we can't have a single national deciding what the rules are. That is not able to implement change. You can either block it or you can change it, but there's kind of very little in between.
I'm going to pick an application of AI, an outcome, if you will, and I'd love to have an equally controversial conversation on that. There's this concept of social credit. If you haven't read it, you'll find out about it, but Google it, please. But social credit, the construct is that you get credit in money terms if you do more than just repay loans, right? So there's more elements to that, and it's being followed in a couple of countries quite strongly with some interesting innovations in tech. So perhaps, Dr. Mehdi, I'd love to get your perspective on social credit. Good, bad, ugly?
So let's stress out that AI is a tool. It depends on the intention of the user rather than anything else. The AI do not get any intention, no power on impacting.
That should be a tweet by itself.
Yeah, no power of impacting human beings. It's a technology as many other technologies. It depends on which hands we are putting this technology. It's like a hammer. That's it, meaning it's nothing behind that. Now, social credit, and then the way to, where do we put this social credit, in which hands? Who is doing that and for which purpose? And then I'll talk about later, for example, there's a lot of initiative in bringing the financial infrastructure with the healthcare infrastructure both together, trying to merge these two together. That's clearly a very dangerous way of merging that two spaces. So if you put in AI on that, depends on the ends, depends on the one behind the AI, how they will deal with the perspective of using the combination of these two data together, and what kind of orientation. If we talk about, rather than AI, simply data and data stigma that we may have, that can be generated by the AI. For example, pre-diagnosis of TB. We have run a campaign of pre-diagnosis of TB, And then we convey some of the flagged patients for a TB test. That was a big stigma, especially when we have wrong prediction indicators for these patients. So it could be the same thing for HIV. It could be a lot of, there could be a lot of misuse of that. And within that space, AI, social credit, what's about the misinformation and behavioral change? So if we put misinformation in social credit, and then if we are able to bypass system rules and then ruining reputation of others, making very harmful for others, since we can provide with some wrong data inside of the system, then what are the guardrails? What are the rules that we need to implement in order to avoid any kind of this stigma related to these citizens? It's very controversial system for the moment, depending again on the end users and the intention behind these social credits. But for the moment, I'm very skeptical with the intentions and then measure use cases that have been employed and deployed regarding the use of social credit.
Quick. Chris, Jamie, quick rebuttal or agreement with Dr. Mehdi, social credit, good, bad?
I mean, I think Mehdi put it very well. You know, it's how it's used. You know, the problematic dimension that I'm sure is omnipresent in everybody's mind is, you know, what about when some of these political factors are introduced as dimensions of social credit, right? So if you have, say, a particular political party in power that that is not just monitoring the harmful behaviors of the citizens, say, whether they've engaged in, you know, in harmful violent criminal conduct to others, whether they're paying their debts on time, whether they're following rules that are merit-based in terms of their interactions with others. But also if they are querying or questioning certain government policies or practices, and if that's a dimension of social credit, then of course, suddenly this tool is being used to stifle what would otherwise actually be healthy and productive civic discourse. And therein lies, you know, the fear, the well-founded fear, in my view, of so many, you know, and I think, you know, sort of Mehdi spoke to the technical background better than I could, but that's the well-founded fear, and that's where the danger lies. And again, that's where informed policy on the part of governments and how these tools are used is so critical. And it's great that there are events, you know, like this, you know, and thanks to yourselves at Quilt and Save the Children for organizing, for allowing us to be part of this panel to discuss those important questions. But, you know, we're amongst a privileged group where we're able to do that. You know, how do we, and it goes to, I think, the point made earlier about civic education, you know, capacity for youth and others as, of course, they grow older, to be discerning about the integrity of content that they are receiving. And as the world comes under increased sort of macro fiscal pressures, you know, it's very easy for governments to start cutting back, right, on things like education. And that, of course, sows the seeds of increased civic vulnerability to things like misinformation down the road, right? And I think you've seen that particularly, say, for example, in the US, where, you know, say, you know, extreme interpretations of Chicago school economics, you know, in some states have rendered the populations in those states where there have been those cuts back, or the state needs to do less, including in education, and that means their populations are actually more vulnerable to that misinformation.
So true, so true. Jamie, I know we talked about social credit, and you were a fan.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I'm curious to know, at what point do you also start to look at people's social media behavior and put that towards their social credit? So do you follow the wrong account? Do you follow too many meme accounts? Do you watch enough YouTube videos that are about finance, or enough documentaries? Does that get to be weighed in? I'm curious at what point, that would be involved or uninvolved, because the youth today are spending more time online than they are offline. And so, would that be considered as well as an indication? I don't know. Can I answer the question you'd asked earlier about the jobs? I've been
Absolutely,
thinking about
yes.
it a lot. Because I think you did raise something really interesting about jobs disappearing from automation and from AI. And, we've seen even at AIfluence as we're a startup. So as the platform gets better, we need less humans to do manual tasks, counting how many likes or comments, looking at the sentiment, giving it a thumbs up or thumbs down. That all gets automated over time. However, as we do better, as we can identify influencers faster, we can hire more of them. And we can actually cut our in-house costs in order to bring on more people publicly. And so instead of working with one Kim Kardashian, could you work with hundreds of regular people? And that's impossible without the AI to both look at the analytics of the account, to look at the posts and go through all of that. And so I do get excited that AIfluence, at least, and I think AI plays a big role, is building what I'm calling a circular communication economy. Instead of the money only going to the Facebook and Google ad credits or printing houses like it would in traditional media, you're putting it back in the hands of the community that's creating the content. And that AI on AIfluence's side is actually allowing us to see how it shows up. So I think that the jobs may not be always even in-house, but that AI allows us to really kind of spread wings that wouldn't have been possible without it.
Chris, please.
I mean, one reservation, acknowledging the point.
We're supposed to be all
very well.
aligned on this panel. It's like going upside down. I love it.
I mean, the risk, of course, is that we embed and even deepen digital inequalities that reside around digital inequality, right? So it's like, yes, opportunity for more jobs, but jobs for whom, doing what, right? And so where there are digital inequalities around the world, there will be, of course, embedded inequality of access to those jobs, and then even where there are those types of jobs, right? Curating content for whom, and then what bias does that embed into into the nature of that content that's provided, and who it's accountable to, right? Then of course it's accountable to its audience, and its audience is those with digital access, right? And so that can that has there are a number of different exclusionary dimensions across those sort of structures that I think are concerning. And yes, as because automation may disproportionately actually affect those on the wrong side of that digital inequality divide. So that's the one concern I have. I'm not saying it's not possible to overcome it, but I think we need more discourse and debate about the how we overcome those things, and that's something that I feel like maybe we're just scratching the surface on.
It's like the horse carriage in the automobile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Governments have such a big responsibility to make sure exactly what you said doesn't happen. I'm going to leave a few minutes at the end for audience participation. I've got a few texts telling me I need to do that. But there are 2-3 things that the panelists and I wanted to share, which is how do we bring this to SBC, to the work that we all do in some shape or form. And we tied it back to these 2 ideas of movement of technology that's happening at extremely rapid pace, and the performance of that technology to enable us to do the work that we do best. And this is a slide that I've stolen from a lady called Cathie Wood. She's a controversial investor, has done very well and now is not doing that well. But the data, this is not about Cathie Wood. The data point here is that it takes 27 days from the time one of SpaceX's rockets lands back in the ocean for it to get refurbished. And the reason I bring up that data point is because on average, it takes my organization 27 days to make a 100-slide deck. The lift is so dramatic and so different that there's an organization that can put a rocket back in the sky in 27 days. It makes you reimagine technology, because before that it took a year. So and then at the speed with which AI is coming, it'll behoove us. Technology always under-delivers in the short term and overwhelms in the long term. This long term is going to be shorter and crisper. So bringing it to us in the work that we do, the panelists and I felt there were 4 areas that all of you should be thinking about as you seek to test out AI and play with it. Design, content, so designing programs, content creation of programs, reach, scale, and frequency of programs, and moving from community to personalization. So I'm going to trouble you, Chris, to kick us off. As you think about using AI to design better interventions, do you feel that AI shortens your time, improves the credibility of the work you do? And how would you design an SBC campaign, change intervention on the ground or digitally? And how does AI enable you to do that faster and better?
I think the big change is like the departure from, say, conventional approaches to monitoring and evaluation, for example, right? Where, say, you might have household surveys, which are enormously useful, but they're snapshots in time, right? And so what you might call the velocity of the data, like the frequency with which that data is produced, is poor, right? Once a year, twice a year, whatever it is. Whereas if you have a model that's able to forecast change, right? So one, that model is going to be based on historicity, right? On content over time that is more voluminous, and has a level of predictive accuracy that underpins its credibility. And then you have a configuration of phenomena, right? And a proportionate contributions of those phenomena to change, which then enables, say, development organizations, humanitarian organizations to more precisely target what they do, when, where, over what timeline, with whom, how they communicate about it, to actually optimize their social and behavioral change impact, right? And to build into their programming, which is, programming life cycles, whether it's international development finance organizations, or whether it's other development actors, the program design and then implementation timeline has its own problems, particularly when they're functioning in some of the most fluid and volatile contexts in the world, right? They're designed on the basis of what's happened over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whereas the context changes rapidly. So when you have dynamic models, as opposed to just the household surveys, you're able to see the changing nature of what is associated with change. And then you can build that into the design of your development programming so that you can iterate within the timeline, rather than saying, I'm sorry, but we've designed this program and it's set for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? So we're going to keep doing what we're doing, even though it's suddenly redundant because the context has changed, right? And you can monitor and evaluate that, right? So that's the big benefit. Not to say it can complement and ever leverage, right? If you're forecasting change in number and density of built structures as a proxy for population, still those household surveys are really useful. They identify what neighborhoods in towns and cities are have the most vulnerable households. How many people on average live in those households? There are data gaps in machine learning models, right? Because they're dependent on specific data that has velocity, and it's not going to have that level of specificity. So you can at least say, okay, we're now able to forecast change in the number and density of built structures in those neighborhoods as of, and see change in the levels or number of people that are most vulnerable, right? Because, we're triangulating that modeling with the more orthodox approaches to M&E in the past.
A large part of behavior change is tied to the idea of getting enough content. So if you just think of nudge theory as one of the theories, it's the right content at the right reach, scale, and frequency. So Jamie, I'd love to get your perspective on, how has AI helped in helping get more content in more hands at more scale and frequency?
Yeah, Well, of course, as I mentioned, we wouldn't be able to find all these people if it wasn't for AI, but then measuring what works and what doesn't work. So we can see which content, what's the, is it a video? Is it humorous? Is it a fact? Is it all text-based? Which of those pieces of content is getting the most likes, comments, reshares, which countries, what languages? And so we're able to use AI to really understand how the data is working and then change. Right? If we see that this isn't working, we're going to shift and we're going to shift again. And we're going to keep improving the content itself in order to make sure it's communicating with the audience the most effective way possible. And I think without AI, then you're sitting there, a bunch of, people in a room going, okay, that one's got that, and then building on pivot tables, which we all love pivot tables, but that's not scalable. It can't be forever. And so that's really the value that it's really brought for AIfluence and our work.
Thank you, Jamie. And community to personalization, a large chunk of behavior change campaigns that have been run historically have all been tied to communities. Dr. Mehdi, when you and I spoke yesterday, we talked about the idea that finally we're at the point where I can be personally spoken to. You can be, and machinically we can understand how to deliver behavior change at the individual level. So would love for you to share a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. That's a very critical moment where we are moving from the normal definition of community to a new definition of digital community, defining new digital markers of communities. What does it mean, really, community today? Is it neighborhood? Is it the interests? I can be interested in sharing same interest with someone based in the US. Are we forming a community? We have seen a lot of other kind of specific aspects inside of the community, like transmission of mental disorders among the same community, promotion of mental disorders when it comes to the health side. And then that's very critical. And then a lot of research are currently focusing on the redefinition of social determinant of health in the light of the new definition of what is a community, what are digital markers of community. And then within that space, there is a big avenue for research when it comes to the personalization, patient preference, understanding what is the real behavior that each of our patients inside of the community or the cohort of patients, how he's reacting to different perception, what is the different perception, different vision, different intention. And then that's being done with the help of AI, because we today are able to treat and process with the unstructured data, which was not the case years ago. We have shifting from quantitative data to qualitative data. We have no longer numbers. We can do some natural language processing. We can do some sentiment analysis. We can get this perception. We can analyze videos and then see if patient is in pain or not, if it's in stressful situation or not. So we can optimize the approach we are doing with our patients to bring much more humanized approach, much more personalized approach that can fit with their willing. But in the same case, at the same level, that's very dangerous, because we will be able to target these patients or these citizens with very personalized advertisements, with very personalized subliminal message, meaning you and I, if we open the same application in the same location, we will not have the same advertisement. We'll have different things. Yes. So that's coming also. So on the other hand, and then for the first one, where we provide some health services, personalized health advices, that's very important to feed in the system with very good data, good quality data. But on the other hand, when it comes to misuse of the outcome of machine learning in order to target specific citizens or personalized approach, political approach, whatever kind of approaches is, then here comes the dilemma. Misinformation and disinformation is our only weapon against the totalitarianism approaches in AI. So as long as we keep feeding the AI system to which kind of citizen target system with misinformation and disinformation, we will be away from subliminal message, behavioral change that is not implicit for the citizen. So it's not always something that is going against the human rights. It can be our way to save our human rights too. So we need to be very careful when we are dealing with misinformation.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. And I'm going to request for the Slido poll to come up. For those of you who haven't done it, please pop it in there. And then I'd love to open it up to the audience for a set of questions before we come to close. So this is the Slido poll. Have you used any AI tools in designing programs, generating content, in advertising or digital communication, done any personalization that, as we just spoke about, all of the above or none of the above? Let's take a couple of minutes and do that, please. Okay.
This is fun.
I love how dynamic this is.
I like it's changing.
Slido has no AI, obviously. I'm teasing. So we have roughly a little less than half with none of the above. The all of the above numbers not fully visible. Some personalization, some design, a ton of digital comms. Let's give it another couple of minutes. While we're waiting for that to finish up, I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions that you might have of our panelists. I highly encourage you to grab them for a coffee outside at some point in time over the next day and a half. But if there are questions now, do we do mics? Do we do mics? There's a couple in front, yes. So that there's, go ahead, and then, yeah, please.
Hello. I wanted to ask, I guess, touch more upon the regulation of AI. I know when you guys mentioned the regulation of Twitter, you all had different opinions on how that would look. And I think with AI and the context of this international summit to use AI internationally, I was wondering what your opinions would be to continue developing AI without this regulatory body, like internationally. And like even one of you mentioned how the United States government has like the most experience with technology and law. And I feel like even in that case, it concerns me because I seen like the big tech CEOs at the congressional hearings, and like all the, representatives being so confused on like,
Right.
When their goal is to figure out how AI can address freedom of speech and like censorship, the representatives are more concerned on like how Facebook would be used or how Twitter works. So I was just wondering, I guess, like what are the ethics of continuing to develop AI?
What are the ethics of continuing to develop AI? Oof.
That's an easy one. I'm just kidding.
Who's going to be brave to take the bait here?
Not me. All I can say is I agree. The US government is terrifyingly dinosaurish when you see them talking to anybody in the tech space. And I think the GDPR compliance rules have actually done a bit more than the US has ever even come close to. The only issue is the jurisdiction of the companies in the US. And I think a lot of their revenue is coming from the US. So in regulating it in the US, and I'm not a lawyer, I should really defer, but that's my initial thought is that that's how you kind of do the balance, even though the Europeans have gone a lot further to say, how do we protect people from these companies? It's not necessarily AI based, my response. It's more about big tech as a whole. But there's absolutely more to do than has been done already.
Well, I know there are a few questions coming. So I'm going to, there was a question here, well, okay, we have a bunch of hands. So anybody, anywhere, grab a mic. All right.
Thank you. I was lucky. I also have a reflection and questions for you on one question on the general discussion of regulation of technology for the public interest or the public good, and who decides that. And it reminds me of a story that it might look unrelated, but maybe is not so much. I'm from Colombia, but I live in the south of Switzerland, very close to Codogno, which was the town that where the first outbreak of COVID started in Europe. And very quickly, their health system was very overwhelmed, of course. And at some point, they needed to decide who gets into an intensive care unit and who doesn't. And at that point, of course, that was like deciding who lives and who doesn't. Those decisions, of course, at the very beginning were made in any way, or they were not made. At some point, of course, regulations came on how to decide, and protocols came on how to decide that, which of course, this creates a lot of outcry on how can you decide who lives, who dies, who are you to decide these kind of things. What my reflection is that before those regulations that were so controversial, those decisions were left unmade or made by doctors just in the worst of conditions. They were tired, burnout. It was the worst. So those decisions are made somehow, in a way. So my reflection would be, I know that I know very little about artificial intelligence, but I would imagine that those decisions have to be made in advance. Like if you have a car that drives on its own, then there's a lady, an old lady or a baby, the car has to decide who will run over, this kind of very crazy dilemmas. My question would be very quickly, if you have experience working with artificial intelligence, these type of dilemmas and how you solve it, because it's unregulated. So we have to trust like your very good will. Thank you so much.
I'm going to give to Dr. Mehdi, but I think the preamble that I'll use is think of AI like Excel, right? It is a tool. Us as humans are going to put stuff in it and decide it, but perhaps you can say that more eloquently than I just did.
Yeah, thanks. It's perfectly. That's the AI will replicate the human behavior in that case scenario. Meaning if let's pick a very simple example. You have a red light. If we pick the classical programming way, red you stop, green you move, and then if we have 1 million colors, then you can do this classical programming. So the AI will observe the human behavior and replicate it later. So, oh, pink, he moves. Okay, that's fine. So that's how that comes to the autonomous car. And then at the end, if these exceptional case and scenario do not show up in the data set that is being used for training the model, then that's a bug. That's a kind of the accuracy, that's a kind of a problem, and the AI will not decide. The AI may continues a very normal behavior, considering this data, baby or old lady or old man, maybe, as something inexceptional, business as usual. So it continues, and then we don't know which kind of behavior it will be followed. What we know, if that the first time it will happen, that gives a precedent. It's like the many other case scenarios, and then it will be followed up by other models later on, depending on how we will label the decision-making process. So it comes back again to the human behind the data, behind the reaction of model, saying what the autonomous car decided at that moment is good or bad. And then it gets back to the human being again.
Exactly. I saw about 10 hands up, so I'm going to be crunching through questions quickly. This lady there, yes, go ahead, please.
I have a microphone. Hello, I'm Marijke Shamiras from Busara. Thank you for this fantastically exciting panel, and thanks for the name checking, Jamie. What boggles the mind is the two roads on which we're traveling at the moment, the intense individualization and fragmentation that you've been talking about, and then the other road, which is more like a very, very bumpy, potholed path to walk on, is the way a lot of development programs continue to think about identity, which is in very, very crude categorizations of women, youth, old, young. And I wonder whether you would have some words of encouragement for people who are continuing to think about targeting in this way, to say, no, you can think about identity in a much more nuanced, personalized way, and yet continue to deliver programs at some sort of scale. Thank you.
So the question, if I'm going to translate it badly, is deep individualization and nuance, but also being able to execute at scale.
So I want to complement that. So I had a client working in the HIV and PEPFAR space, and they said, who's your target audience? They said, we have a very specific target audience. I said, great. who is it? They said men between 18 and 49, and then women who have not had a child between 18 and 35, and women who have had a child between 18 and 50. It's like, that's everybody. That's everybody, right? That is not specific. That's the whole population. You're right. And so, there are these groups and we give them labels, but they're really not nuanced. And so aside from AI, actually, machine learning has a huge opportunity. There's a partner organization that we're always talking to that says, but could we use the data to really understand who's not coming back? It's not men don't come back. It's going to be men who live in this township who are between 18 and 32, who've gone to 2 appointments, but not the third, are the most likely to default, right? And so how can we complement our conversations with machine learning that looks at the evaluation of implementation in order to bridge this gap? And I really think that the conversation side has to go with what Chris is talking about, which is using better data to design the SBC components rather than looking at these umbrellas, but then focusing on the raindrop. And we can only focus on the raindrop if we use that really great big data before we design in order to funnel down to the right people, in my perception.
There's a microphone here somewhere, and if the microphones are at the back, I see there's a couple of hands up at the back. And while the microphone's getting there, there's a huge amount of segmentation that you don't have to do like 2 segments anymore. You can do 7, 8, 15 segments, and that still gives you scale. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. So I haven't used any AI tools. So as we are a majority here that we hasn't used the AI tool, I have a question. What is a good advice? What a good advice is for a beginner in this in AI words, in AI words? Thank you.
This is what is good advice. So one of the things that the panel and I put together is this becoming an AI athlete. The right athlete is featured, by the way. But there's a gentleman called Robbie Allen who I follow on Twitter and I read on Medium. Medium's a website where there's a lot of content put. For those of you not familiar with it, I would say go read. There's a lot of democratized information. YouTube has a ton of well-informed videos. I think that's probably the best place to start. So do that. Check out ChatGPT and DALL-E, and you'll in a couple of weeks' time you'll have enough raw material on it. But definitely follow this gentleman, and then there are threads that'll come from there. And there are 2 or 3 other questions, and then I think we're getting to time. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for the presentations there. They were really great. I was looking at the last flash of where we've been responding, and the first one was saying none of the above, and I was looking above, there was nothing. So I don't know whether the design of AI is for us to tend to get upside down, but anyway, the question is, I'm looking at the very rural, very, we tend to be thinking like everything has gotten to the level of technology to where all the US is. Oh my God, you don't know, 80% of my country is so rural, and typically rural that everything that we are thinking about, we need to go segmentation and sub-segmentation for us to get in there. And I didn't get the perspective of how rural and so rural we can get into the end there. Thank you.
I'm happy to kick off and then please jump in, but so yes, the world is not digitally equal for sure. It's a well-known fact. For those of us who've spent time on ground in material ways, there's large amounts of inequity, and the internet is still to come. Running water is still to come. Electricity is still to come. So all of that is true. Simultaneously, AI is coming at a rapid pace, right? So I don't know if Chris or Jamie, you'd like to add anything to that, but in your work, how do you deal with the non-US? And the US actually has 3 kinds of countries, right? There are disconnected parts of the US. I do want to state that too.
I mean, I think like even within some countries or territories, there's enormous inequality or digital inequality or inequality of data production about those territories, right? And so, I mean, one case I really enjoy is the borderlands region of Ethiopia, northeastern Kenya, southwestern Somalia. We've developed a model there that that forecasts change in population, right? Using the number and density of built structures as a proxy. Now, this is one of simultaneously the most data scarce territories in the world, also one of the most severely climate affected territories in the world, and a particularly insecure part of the world, right? And so so there, of course, it's not the most lucrative place if you if you're sending your satellites around the world to cover each day. So in a territory like that, you have to actually amalgamate different satellite sources in order to get enough images of each of all the towns and cities across this territory to have even just monthly frequency of imagery capturing every neighborhood of every place, right? That's before you get to you get to things like how representative is the data produced actually about these territories. So even precipitation data we find is not that great, right? And so you have like FuseNet and you have insurance companies that will rely on some of this data when they're providing sort of agricultural insurance, other types of insurance to sort of these agropastoralists that are now having to migrate further and further in order to graze their herds, for example. And then you have these cultural phenomena changing, right, that the satellite imagery is able to capture. So, for those unfamiliar with this particular territory, culturally, thousands of years, land is perceived as communal. So I come along with my herd, I should be allowed to graze, but actually these phenomena are changing and people are starting to fence off territory and protect it, right? And so historians like that might be informing your work will come along and say, oh no, people don't do that culturally. The land is communal, people can come in, but then the satellite imagery is telling you a completely different story. You literally see, the fences constructed, the greenery, the land become more green. And then your anthropologist there is telling you, oh, actually people are paying armed actors to protect this territory. But then, you find actually the level of geographic elevation is actually more highly associated with population change than the precipitation data, which your climate scientists will tell you actually, the level of geographic elevation alongside like what time of year it is actually more informative as to the availability of rainfall than the rainfall data itself, because the level of geographic specificity of the rainfall data is not as good. Right. So it's really that constant interaction between the diversity of lived experiences, context specific, multidisciplinary expertise on that territory, that enables us to start to overcome some of these digital inequalities specific to these territories. Right. I'm not pretending we've reached some binary endpoint where we're there, but to start that journey, just requires that consciousness, and we're a long way from it. But there are these methods to be able to mitigate, the data scarcity of some of these places. Is the point.
Well articulated. I know we're now crashed into time. Maybe one last question, and or maybe two last questions, and then we close. But we'll keep it rapid. I know we're keeping folks from lunch, which is indoors, not by the pool, as Leanne said.
Hi, quick one for you. I'm just curious on your thoughts about the use of AI to power autonomous killer robots, which are now in development and use around the world.
Love it. Maybe we'll take the second question too and try and answer them in one go.
So there's one up there.
So there's the lady up there. Okay, all right. So autonomous killer robots, and your question is?
Yes. Hello? Yeah, thank you very much. So Dr. Mehdi, thank you very much. My daughter has been suffering with schizophrenia for 7 years. So when you talk about taking it from community to individual, it's so important. So how are you incorporating end user right from the beginning into the process of AI? And how do you make sure that it goes not just sitting at the research level in your center, but gets back to that end user. So she's not sitting on schizophrenia TikTok, but she's actually using all the research and the findings that you've done. Thank you.
I'm going to take one more question and sort of couple it all together. And maybe the autonomous killer robot question can go at lunch, but you, sir.
Thank you for the question. Good presentations that you've done. My question is about the mental health of kids, for example, in Africa, who be jumping from no technology at all to virtual reality, because artificial intelligence is really moving fastly in the world. What is, the element that are considered to integrate the mental health of kids and adolescents when they're growing? And the other one is, how do we keep the diversity that we have in the world when we have the artificial intelligence taking more place than just normal life that we're having in our different communities? Thank you.
It's an outstanding question. Thank you. I'm going to let you close us out with the answer on the schizophrenia and then the mental health jump.
Yeah, sure. So it's little weapons and AI, meaning that's already being discussed. And then, although I'm not very optimistic about the results. I'm very pessimistic by nature, but I think it's something that should be coming from the ground rather than from top-down approach. It should be a bottom-up approach when it comes to the regulation of the AI. That's what we have done for the open source thing. The community regulated the open source and the outcome of it. And then we have created sources of revenues. And then when it comes to the AI, it should be also considered as a bottom-up approach rather than what we are doing today and getting a regulation that do not fit with the real practice on the ground. So the European Commission released the regulation on AI usage in research 2 years ago. Today, it's absolutely obsolete. You can't use it because we are using some synthetic data that is not even announced inside of the European regulation. So we are far beyond what is happening in the regulatory space, and we need to be very careful that. For the schizophrenia, there is a new trend, and especially for when it comes to the mental health, about patient-reported outcome monitoring, patient-reported experience monitoring, that aim and give the possibility to the patient to react quickly to the change in his conditions, especially when it comes to the mental health, because the quicker the intervention is, better the outcome is, and the experience will be improved. As long as we keep the patient as a centric for the overall mental health and digital interventions design, we can reach better goals. There is a lot of translational aspects. So coming from research to practice, and then that's a evidence-based move that we can oversee in the mental health space, especially there, and brain health much more than mental health, because we know about the emergencies of actions when it comes to the brain health disorder, especially for the compliance with the treatment, and how long to get these patients to get back to the normal status once they've stopped their treatment. So there's a lot of things happening there, designing these new digital biomarkers for brain disorder, empower the patient and transforming the patient as a point of care, which make him the owner of his own behavior, and make him also accountable for his behavior. So that's make him more responsible about the outcome of the intervention or the digital intervention that we design. And then finally, for the last question, when it comes to the Africa, and I'm African, I'm also building a lot of digital mental health interventions in Africa because of the shortage of healthcare workforce when it comes to the mental care. But also, when we look at the different program of health assessment in primary school or secondary schools, there is no mental health component in majority of African countries, but in the majority of world countries. We don't consider that a mental health is something that could lead to a better life, to a better outcome later among youth and kids. Now with the different digital assessment tools that we have for depression, for anxiety, for disorder, for brain disorders, which are rarely diagnosed at the beginning of the scholarity of youths, we have the possibility to intervene much quicker, much earlier, and then it's not a problem of honestly of funding or money. It's much more a problem of political willings in terms of the implementation of these new actions in the digital space. We are lack of regulations in major countries and African countries when it comes to digital interventions, how the data will be hosted. We don't have a clarity about the outcome, output, where is the data, who is owning the data. So there is a lot of interrogation there. But once it can be resolved in the classical process of top-down approach, we'll be able, I think, to hopefully to deploy much more digital mental health interventions for youth and kids that could bring them and that could observe them much better in this transition phase where they are moving from nothing to fully immersive in a digital space. We don't know how they will react. What is the next generation mental disorders and conditions will be. They are being observed and they know that they are being observed. So that's the point. But I'm happy to discuss it further with you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehdi. Please find these wonderful three people through today and tomorrow as you have more questions on this. Thank you for being here. With that, let's call it a wrap. A big round of applause to the three of you. Thank you all.
Thank you.